There is a very good game hiding inside Dispatch. It is tied up, gagged, and buried under 50 tons of shouting, swearing, and what I call sensationalist misery syndrome. Every now and then, you hear it knocking from under the rubble, but the noise on top is so loud you can barely tell it's there. The premise is, in theory, a smart twist on the tired superhero genre. You're not the Cape demigod, you're the voice on the headset, the dispatcher in a city crawling with masked vigilantes, enhanced criminals, and collateral damage. You sit at the switchboard while guards and monsters punch each other through apartment blocks. As fertile ground, you could explore what heroism looks like without a suit, what it means to be powerless in a world of power fantasies, what happens to the people who can't fly away when the building collapses. Instead, Dispatch decides to scream at you for several hours. The game is a textbook case of sensationalist misery syndrome, the belief that if everyone is suffering horribly all the time, the story must be profound. Every color is a catastrophe. Every backstory is tragic in at least 3 different ways. There is no such thing as an ordinary person having an awful but recognizably human day. There are only walking disasters. Misery stops being an emotional note and becomes a wallpaper pattern. Then we get to the dialogue, which sounds like it was written by someone who discovered the F word and immediately deleted half the dictionary out of respect. Dispatch doesn't just feature profanity, it basks in it. Every argument is an arms race of curses. Every stressed moment becomes a competition to see who can stack the most expletives into a single sentence. Swearing can be powerful. Here it's just loud. After an hour, you're no longer shocked. You're bored. It's like being trapped in a room with someone who thinks volume equals personality. The game bills itself as adult, but its idea of adulthood is curiously adolescent. Everyone is angry, horny, or homicidal. Often all 3. Sex appears mainly as threat, sleaze, or melodramatic complication. No one has a quiet, normal, conflicted interior life. They have issues in capital letters. That would be bad enough in any genre. In the superhero genre, it's a misgift-wrapped opportunity. Dispatch is so close to saying something interesting and then backs away every time. Think for a moment about what this setup could do. How do emergency services triage when heroes pick their own battles and leave the rest to rot? Who gets saved first, the rich tower or the poor neighborhood under it? What does it feel like to live in a cinematic universe when you're the one on the phone hearing people scream under rubble? How does media mythologizing of heroes clash with what the dispatcher actually hears in their headset? Those are real social issues. Class, policing, inequality, the emotional cost of disaster as entertainment. Dispatch brushes up against them, then scurries back to another twist of personal trauma, another grim revelation, another collar screaming profanities while a gritty soundtrack booms underneath. It wants credit for being new in the superhero space, but it has nothing to say beyond, everything is terrible and everyone is broken. The irony is that the game is doing something structurally fresh for the genre. Street-level perspective, no power fantasy, all talk and triage. That could have been genuinely groundbreaking. It could have been the superhero equivalent of a home front wall movie, the story of the people on the phones instead of the people on the posters. Instead, it throws that all away in favor of relentless edginess. Technically, Dispatch is often impressive. The sound design sells the city in crisis. The central mechanic, juggling simultaneous emergencies, deciding who gets attention and who waits, has bite. The voice actors work hard. You can hear them, straining to breathe life into lines that mostly consist of emotional breakdown plus swear words. The skeleton is strong, but every time the game edges toward nuance, a collar hesitating, a quiet apology, a moral dilemma that doesn't have a clear answer, sensationalist misery syndrome kicks back in. The volume goes up, the profanity spikes, and the scene rushes back to operatic suffering. By the time the credits roll, you don't feel like you've played a daring deconstruction of superheroes or a mature reflection on crisis response. You feel like you've listened to someone bellow "It's so dark" into your ear for 6 hours, while ignoring all the genuinely interesting things they could have talked about instead. There's a better game trapped inside this one, struggling to get a word in between the shouting. Give it fewer capes, fewer tantrums, fewer bombs, and a little faith in actual human issues, and Dispatch might have been the game that finally made the superhero genre grow up. As it stands, it just needs to wash its mouth out with soap and learn to say something worth hearing. Most video games begin by telling you who to shoot. The Outer Worlds 2 begins by asking you what you believe. Obsidian's sequel returns to the corporate dystopia of its predecessor, but this time in the Arcadia system, where a totalitarian protectorate, who fights against corrupt governments and corporations, but just as prone to corruption, and just as bad as the people they rally against. a merged megacorp called Antis Choice who are invading the Arcadia system, who want to exploit the rifts and its technology for personal gain and profit under the guise of them bringing freedom and prosperity to the sector. And a numerology-obsessed technocrat cult called the Order of the Ascendant are busy proving that ideology is just greed with a better logo, who thinks the best way to fix society is trying to crack equations, hoping to predict and control the future, and isn't on the best terms with either factions and seems obsessed in what they call the plan. The premise sounds like standard issue satirical science-fi satire. Government versus corporation versus science cult, all fighting over faster-than-light travel and the future of a colony cut off from Earth. But what matters is not the setup. It's what the game does with it. The Outer Worlds 2 understands that politics isn't just something characters shout about in cutscenes. It's the air they breathe, the slogans on their toothpaste, the terms and conditions on their lives. Where lesser political games give you a big speech about freedom and then herd you down a corridor, this one quietly hands you the keys and says, "You drive. Try not to kill everybody." You play an agent of the Earth Directorate, dropped into Arcadia to investigate mysterious rifts and an increasingly unstable three-way Cold War. The Protectorate sells you order, Antis Choice sells you happiness, and the Order sells you certainty. All three are seductive. All three are dangerous. The game's great insight is that most bad systems don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as the only adults in the room. The satire is not just a string of jokes about evil corporations, though there are plenty of those. It's structural. Walk through a Protectorate city and you feel the weight of surveillance. The posters that promise security if you'll just stop asking questions. Stroll through an Antis Choice company town and the billboards grin at you like a used car salesman who has bought the planet and your organs. Visit the Order's gleaming halls and you meet people who have replaced their consciences with equations. Each faction is a different answer to the same question. How do we keep control when reality is falling apart? Unlike a lot of modern issue games, The Outer Worlds 2 doesn't flatter you with easy cynicism. It doesn't line up three strawmen and let you shoot the one in the ugliest hat. Instead, it forces you into the lonely position of the grown-up. You choose who gets the shipyard, who gets the medicine, who gets to define truth in a colony whose information is centrally managed. There is no golden dialogue option that says, fix everything. There is only, who are you willing to hurt, and why? This is where the game earns that overused phrase, player choice. Everyone claims to have it. Here, it actually bites. Whole questlines branch depending on whether you side with a union of overworked asteroid miners, a PR division trying to spin a catastrophe, or a quiet scientist who would rather the world burn than publish fraud data. Fail a skill check in a tense negotiation and you don't just miss out on a collectible, you might push a city closer to martial law. Succeed, and the fallout can take 10 hours to find you. What struck me most, though, is how respectful the game is of the player's intelligence. In an era when big-budget games are terrified you might go 5 seconds without stimulation, The Outer Worlds 2 gives you room to think. Logs are not underlined in neon. Side quests don't pause the world until you complete them. The game trusts you to piece together that a minor clerk's suicide note, a shipping discrepancy, and a propaganda broadcast are all parts of the same cover-up. If you miss it, that's not a failed content delivery. That's you living in a world where some things stay buried. By the time the credits roll, your Arcadia may be ruled by a chastened Protectorate, a triumphant Antis Choice, a mathematically devout theocracy, or some fragile, improvised balance between them. None of these endings feel triumphant. All of them feel like the result of your compromises, your blind spots, your stubborn ideals. The game doesn't congratulate you, it just lets you sit in what you've made. That for me is the quiet triumph of The Outer Worlds 2. It remembers that video games are not just about power fantasies or loot treadmills, or, God help us, battle passes. They are about stepping into a world that feels uncomfortably close to our own, making choices that matter, and then carrying those choices with you after you put the controller down. In its best moments, The Outer Worlds 2 is not preaching, not scolding, not wallowing in misery for its own sake. It is doing something rarer. Treating you like an adult who can handle ambiguity, satire, and the unsettling idea that the villains, slogans sound just a little too familiar for anyone who ever wondered whether games could engage with real issues, capitalism, ideology, propaganda, complicity, without insulting their intelligence. This is your answer. The Outer Worlds 2 is why Sontron51 loves video games. Hit My Dice is the sort of Steam roguelike game you boot up for 10 minutes and then realize you've been staring at bouncing cubes for an hour, joyfully complicit in your own statistical captivity. On paper, it sounds like a design meeting that got out of hand. A roguelike deck builder, except the cards are Yahtzee dice you can surgically re-engineer, stuff with modifiers, then supercharge with 130 relics, until probability itself files a complaint. In practice it plays like Belotro wandered into a casino back room and found a Moff Gremlin scribbling combo trees on the walls. The loop is simple and devious. Roll dice, chase high-scoring hands, scrape together just enough points to advance, then spend your winnings on more dice, weirder faces, and relics that turn a polite score attack into a slot machine possessed by a game designer. Each new relic or modifier feels like a tiny rules hack, and the pleasure comes from stacking so many of them together that the game stops being chance and starts being engineering with confetti. What makes it bizarrely engaging is how unglamorous it all looks on the surface. You're not slaying monsters or saving galaxies. You're nudging pips on a cube from 3 to 4 and feeling weirdly excited about it. It's accountancy as a contact sport. When a build finally comes together and your score detonates off the leaderboard, you don't cheer so much as cackle, as if you've just cheated at probability and gotten away with it. The structure leans into its obsession. Multiple starting dice cups, dozens of modifiers and consumables, daily runs, and a boss roster that exists mainly to punish hubris turn each session into a miniature lab experiment. What if every face grows when rolled? What if I make all 6 sides the same and dare the game to stop me? When it works, you feel brilliant. When it fails, you blame the dice, then immediately cue another run, just to prove a point. There are rough edges. Some builds feel undercooked, some bosses lean more gotcha than clever, and the interface occasionally acts like tooltips are a limited resource. But for a small, relatively inexpensive indie, Pit My Dice delivers something rare. A score-chasing toy that respects your intelligence while happily feeding your inner gremlin. You don't play it for story, spectacle, or moral lessons. You play it because watching numbers explode from a plan you stitch together out of tiny, logical steps is one of gaming's purest, strangest pleasures, and this little dice gremlin knows exactly how to keep that feeling rolling. And of course the only game where you can put the number 32 inches and nobody complains it's rigged.